deceit. Telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Tuesday, the 4th of August, year of our Lord 2026. Well, today we're going to go back to what we didn't have a chance to cover yesterday. The show ended as I was just getting into the flock stuff. And what we're talking about is a flock of spies for a surveillance state to watch a flock of sheep. And the more people learn about AI, especially about the data centers and the cameras, the more they learn about that, the more they hate it, and for good reason. And so we're going to try to do our best to get people to understand even more about this and understand the connections to the technocracy. We're going to take a look at what's going on here in Tennessee. We have one of the biggest cheerleaders, the handmaid for the technocracy. Marsha Blackburn is the front runner for governor here in Tennessee. And if she gets in, it's going to be, look out. They're going to make Tennessee the surveillance center of the world if she has a say in it. We're going to talk about what she's saying about it, what her opponents are saying about it, and this is a microcosm for what's coming to your area as well. You better figure out who's with the technocracy and who's against it. This is a key issue. We'll be right back. As a matter of fact, I'm going to start with this article here from World, which is a Christian publication. Are conservatives guilty of political idolatry? And last week, I talked about a poll that said you got a lot of Gen Z people who say they don't want to go to church because there's so much Trump support in these areas. And of course, Steve Watson did an article about that. And he said, it just goes to show how anti-Christian the woke is. And it's like, well, my take on that when I saw it was very different. I looked at it and I thought, that's one of the reasons why we have to oppose these wars, why we have to speak out against the cheerleading of what is being done in the name of Christianity, this Zionism that is out there. That is, I think, the ultimate hypocrisy. And I think people can sniff that out from a mile away. You can be pro-life if you narrowly define that as anti-abortion, but are you pro-life when it comes to standing against genocide, against the targeting of a civilian population for years so that you can steal their land? That's what we're talking about here. That is what genocide is. And if you're going to put, posters up and cheer for Trump in your church service, when I look at that, I personally try to avoid talking about politics when I go into a church. But if the guy up front, if he's the one who is doing cheerleading, I'm out of there. Now, typically with other people, I just kind of leave it with them and say, well, here's what I think the issue is. I'll talk about the issue. And then I'll say, and by their fruit, you will know them. You'll know who you should support. It is a mixed bag. And as they say, well, most conservatives who vote Republican do so because they see it as the least bad option, the lesser of two evils. I would just say as Christians, we should not be applauding evil. And there is much that is evil about this Trump administration. It is Trumpism that people are rejecting. And one of the key things about this, I think, is this artificial intelligence. You got churches out there that are cheering Trump, the guy who is the architect of the mark of the beast, along with Marsha Blackburn, I should say. Now we have, as I mentioned yesterday, a candidate who's an independent running for Congress. And it's kind of interesting in his district, in the 2nd district, you have 3 candidates that are there. The Republican, the Democrat, as a matter of fact, the Republican is the incumbent Tim Burchett. He's introduced a bill that he says we got to ban those daggum things. I'm not sure the bill that he's introduced will do that, but that's the real issue. When you talk about the politicians, do they put forward bills that are actually going to do what they say they're going to do? That's one issue. The other one is, can it ever get, if it's really going to do that, would it ever be able to get past Mike Johnson? That's, of course, a rhetorical question. But this is a guy who is an independent, and he kind of took matters into his own hand. He shot for these doggone things. And they treat this as if you had shot and eaten a bald eagle. This is the story here.
Candidates for Congress spent his night in the Blount County Jail. He's accused of shooting multiple flock cameras around the county. Adam Lee Heimerman was arrested earlier this week. Officials with the sheriff's office said he shot 4 different flock cameras over a 1-week period. Deputies didn't catch the damage until several days later. They say he admitted to using a gun to damage the cameras. One of those cameras near a church, it was damaged while people were attending worship services. Now he faces felony vandalism charges. Heimerman is running for Tennessee's 2nd congressional district in the U.S. House. He is one of 2 independents in the race, so he will face Republican incumbent candidate Tim Burchett and Democratic candidate Michaela Barnett in November. His first court hearing is next Wednesday.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of adds to the irony, he works as an outdoor photographer. He's not doing this because he doesn't like the competition. And folks, this is not about photography, of course, either, is it? This is about warrantless searches of everyone. This is about putting a GPS device on each and every one of us. This is about geospatial intelligence. They've been working on this now for 30 years. They've been they organized geospatial intelligence to do anticipatory intelligence. This is back in the late 1990s as the internet started getting practical. They started building this infrastructure. It's been a long time coming, and they're ready to use the net and the web to entrap us in this. And of course, AI is what gives them the ability to put all this stuff together. Without that, it'd just be a bunch of cameras. And that's why when they make the argument, well, this is just about taking pictures. It's not about taking pictures at all. You don't see the forest for the trees if you're saying that. And of course, when they tell you that this is about fighting crime, that is a lie and a canard. And we'll put that to rest here in just a moment as well. As a matter of fact, Flock Safety says the bill by Congressman Tim Burchett would effectively ban controversial cameras, and they call for federal safeguards of these things. Yeah, guard the cameras, not our liberty. That is what the corporation is saying. And we know where this is coming from. This is being pushed by the government, just like censorship was not coming organically from the left-leaning social media companies that were happy to do it. But it's being pushed by the government. It's being pushed by the Democrats. They were the ones sent a massive list to these social media companies saying, ban these people and or shadow ban them, get them off. This is all coming from the government, and they're pretending that it is just a corporate thing. And they're pretending, well, this is just a public square. Everybody's free to take a picture in a public square. That is the most absurd argument. And nearly as absurd is the argument that it helps law enforcement. This doesn't make us safer, just like the war on drugs did not make us safer. What the war on drugs did was it corrupted the police and the courts. It destroyed our Constitution, our individual liberties. It did not do anything at all to stop addiction. That is a spiritual issue. And this has not done anything in terms of crime. And we can take a look at it in the hometown of Flock in Atlanta. The crime statistics that are there prove that it hasn't been effective at all. These are the FBI crime statistics. So that is a moot argument. It's been disproven, as a matter of fact. It is not safe for your liberty, and it is not effective in terms of fighting crime. It's just like the jab. Not safe, not effective. So they are out there saying, well, please don't throw us into that briar patch of the Tim Burchett bill. I'm all for any kind of restriction on Flock, but I don't think that his bill is actually going to do it. He introduced the Protection Against Mass Surveillance Act last week, which would prohibit federal agencies from purchasing, operating, or accessing Flock cameras. They'll have a way around that. They will find a way around that. I think a better approach, and probably we need to have both approaches. I'd like to see Tim Burchett's approach there. I'd also like to see Tom Massey's approach, because Tom Massey understands that the way you get people's attention is with money. That's the way you jerk their chain around. And so what Tom Massey's bill does is it says we're going to cut the funding to any towns or police departments that use this stuff. That would be effective. That is probably why it will not get to the floor for a vote. Mike Johnson will stop that from happening. So any agency found to obtain Flock data, according to Tim Burchett bill, in violation of the proposed law would be required to delete it within 30 days, and prosecutors would be barred from introducing it as evidence. I still don't think that that is really much of a disincentive. You can't keep it for more than a month, and you can't use it for evidence. Really? I think that you need to make this proactive. Where this is happening is at the local level. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the surveillance state infrastructure is being built. You got to take away that foundation. That's the local police department. That's these town councils who are probably getting massive kickbacks under the table. They've got these NDAs that they're signing, and they should not be allowed to do that. That's one of the things that needs to be done, and that's one of the candidates for governor is talking about that. Make that illegal for town councils to sign an NDA. They say, well, we can't tell you, the citizens of this town, we can't tell you what we're doing because I've got an agreement with the corporation. Well, then who do you represent? Were you elected by the corporation? Well, as a matter of fact, they probably were. That's their constituents right there. In response to the legislation, a flock safety spokesperson, and again, that's the name of the corporation, Flock Safety. We need some flock liberty, don't we? So anyway, they said that this would, we can have safety, privacy, and the Fourth Amendment rights can all coexist. That's right. It used to. But now what they're doing is they're deleting privacy, liberty, the Fourth Amendment, in the name of safety. You got to ask yourself, how did we survive as a country without having a surveillance state like this? You know, people get ingrained into these new things. It's just like the Department of Education. When that came in, that was 1980. And that was during the election between Carter and Reagan. And as Carter put that in, Reagan said, I'm going to get rid of that when I get in. But he didn't. And when you leave it in there for 8 years, now all of a sudden people think, well, if we got rid of the Department of Education, nobody would know anything, right? We couldn't educate any kids. No, the Department of Education was about controlling people with funding. Thomas Massey understands how this operates. It's the money. It's the money trail. And so Flock said, rather than banning a critical public safety tool, no, the surveillance state is never safe. And that's what you're creating. We should have some clear safeguards. Just give us some rules, some guidelines. We can operate inside of that. It's exactly what we had in terms of when we talked about the data centers being surveillance centers. You need to understand that, as Matt Trujillo pointed out, he said, if you oppose these things, and certainly they are bad in terms of what they do to electricity prices, in terms of what they do to water, what they do to their neighbors, in terms of noise, all of those things are horrible, and they should be opposed. However, if you stop at that, you're missing the real foundation of this stuff, because they can come back and they can address the water issues, they can address the noise issues, they might even address the electricity issues by saying all that cost has to be borne by the data centers, and then they'll get money from the federal government for that. So each and every one of those things could be solved. What can't be solved is the infringement on our liberty. And once we get a police surveillance state in and the cement hardens, it's going to be hard to get rid of that. It's just like the Department of Education. We keep hearing from the Republicans over and over again, I'm going to get rid of it, right? Heard it this last time from Trump. Well, the WWE CEO is still there, isn't she? Because that's what this is professional wrestling. It's just a show. So the legislation by Burchett came just days before Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. This is, you may know him as, what's the name of the wrestler?
That's got to be Kane.
That's right. Thank you. And so he is in politics, and he's got very libertarian leanings. I interviewed him when he was pushing against he is the highest elected official in Knox County, which is Knoxville. They call him the mayor, but it's kind of like in Texas, they call the chief elected official of the county, they call them a judge, right? So neither of these terms are really what we think, a judge or mayor, but he is the highest elected official in Knox County. Nevertheless, the county commission is the one that had the final say-so on the masks, even though he publicly opposed them. And they're the ones who have the final say-so on these flock cameras. And there's some shenanigans that are happening in the Knoxville area, which is a general area where we live as well. about these flock cameras, but he came out in opposition to this, and I appreciate his opposition to it. He asked for the legislation to be introduced in the General Assembly to create regulations establishing how the technology can be used. And that's where I part company with him, because I don't think we need to know how it can be used. It doesn't need to be used. We don't need to have these flock cameras. There's absolutely no reason for them. They have had a long history of use in Atlanta. And we can see that it doesn't add anything. What it does is it's got the sword of Damocles in terms of these surveillance centers hanging over our head. It's all negative. There's no positive to this. It's just like the vaccine. And just like the vaccine, everybody's going to push it. And they don't really care what you think about it. He said, I'm urging our commission to prohibit the use of flock cameras and similar devices in our county. With AI and deep learning, vehicle attribute recognition, multi-camera and multi-object tracking, vastly increased networking, data retention capabilities, these are much different devices than they were a decade ago. And so he's saying don't put them in until we got regulations and guidelines. Why would you say, how are the regulations and guidelines, things like the Bill of Rights, how are those working out for us? I don't see that working too well. I say just flat out ban it. There is no use case for these things, and that has been proven. In response to this public statement, the state representative from that area introduced legislation that would target flock cameras and say that they would have to have guidelines written by January in 2027. Again, the regulation approach, I think, is an appeasement approach. That's trying to not oppose and create political enemies of these people and surrendering to them. So what do Republican candidates for governor think about these topics? Now, you may not live in Tennessee. We are carried over a large number of states and internationally as well, but this is the way the politicians are typically going to respond to this type of thing. You're going to see these approaches. You look at the three different candidates, and they got three different approaches. And you're going to see this repeated everywhere. Mark those people. Here's Marsha Blackburn's response. She said, data centers are going to be a local decision. Of course, there'll be bribes coming from Trump to, he's already said that. You're going to make so much money if you do what I want, right? You'd be stupid not to take all that money. And of course, the local county commissioners are going to do that. They can build monuments to themselves and name them after themselves. They might even get this money personally because of corruption. We're going to have to store all this telephone data, says Marsha Blackburn. I tell you, she is either dangerously stupid or she's been completely misinformed. This is not about telephone data. This is something that is far worse. She said, and so these, we're going to have that. That's why we got all this AI data that we're generating, all this telephone data, she said. These are communities that want to have a data center. Oh, yeah, that's right. Is that right, Marsha? Do you see people out there? Do you see communities out there? People, we want a data center. We want a data center. No, it's actually just the opposite. There is a massive uprising that is not tied to either political party saying they don't want these data centers. They don't want them, the physical thing in their physical location. And we don't want the surveillance that comes with them wherever they're located or however much water or electricity they use. She said they have electrical and water capacity that they can handle this stuff. Well, we'll see about that. We'll see what happens to the electricity rates if Marsha Blackburn gets elected as governor. We also know that there is proper placement in industrial parks and a lot of areas that would have a data center, but data centers ought not to be right up next to the Nashville Zoo. They both have to bring this in because there's a lot of pushback against that. And I reported that. I said, yeah, they got people in uproar because they put it next to the zoo. And of course, if you've got the loud noise that we've heard from these data centers 24/7, what's that going to do to the animals? Oh, yeah, that's not good for them. It stresses them out, doesn't it? Well, what about humans? Oh, we don't care about that. It's only the zoo animals that we care about. These are Republicans, folks. Then you have another Republican who's running against her.
Well, you see, animals in a zoo are meant to be viewed. Cattle are meant to be slaughtered.
That's right. That's the difference. We're cattle. We're not zoo animals. Congressman Rose is running against her. And he said, I think this should be a local decision. Sounds just like her, doesn't he? Local communities should have the final say on this. I think it would be helpful if the state takes the lead in laying out a framework to assist local communities in evaluating whether or not a data center might make sense for the local community, in the same way that Trump will help you to make that decision by offering you a massive pile of bribery cash. Fiat dollars. I just created these yesterday out of my imagination. So he says, some local communities have been proactive here, and I think it'd be useful if the state provided some assistance. These two people, Marsha Blackburn, Senator, and Congressman Rose, both of them see this as a jobs issue. And it is a jobs issue to them. That's who pays their bills, these big corporations and the technocracy. So he said how communities should weigh the pros and cons and how they should access where the data center makes sense for the local community. You see how this is playing out? You're going to see these same arguments regardless of where you live, regardless of whether or not you even live in the United States. We have a lot of listeners who live in other countries. But you're going to see these same arguments being made. The pragmatic argument. Well, if we could just regulate it enough. Well, if the local communities want it, that's fine. We could help them along. We could help them with some money to make sure they get it. If they really would like to have this, we would like to have it as well. Because we've got to fight those Chinese. That's the other thing that's coming up here. Nashville, Davidson County said recently had a data center that wanted to locate next to the Nashville Zoo. They decided belatedly that might not be the best fit for that area of their city. So that's Rose who's running. And then he continued, he said, the Chinese are actually interfering with the affairs of our country. They're actually spending money to try to stir up dissent here at home. And you have to ask yourself, why would they do that? They want the United States communities in our country to turn away data centers so they'll be more likely located in China. Well, some of us don't want our data to be in the hands of the Chinese. I got to say, I've never had China come after me, try to shut me down, try to debank me, try to tax me, try to send me to war. That's my government that does that. That's not the Chinese government. And as they keep trying to make China the boogeyman for all this stuff, we know that the Israelis are heavily embedded in companies like Palantir and others. We know there's just been this bill in Congress to merge our intelligence with theirs, as well as our military industrial complex. And so you'll see on social media all these memes about, we don't want people who are beholden to a foreign country like China, do we? And so they'll make fun of the fact that these people don't ever talk about the fact that we're owned by the Zionists. And so they put pictures of these politicians wearing a little triangular Chinese hat. I don't even know what those things are called.
I always think of them as like the rice paddy hat.
Yeah, so they got those little hats, little Chinese hats, and they're touching the Great Wall of China instead of wearing a yarmulke and touching the wall in Jerusalem. And so this is a canard if ever there was one, folks. This is not we don't want to get into an AI arms race with China. If we do, we're going to turn our country into China. It's despicable what they have done to their own people in terms of traffic light system. And they did that before that started being put in place by all the Western governments because of the pandemic MacGuffin. They started doing that. So Blackburn comes back and says, well, we know law enforcement tell us that they're very helpful in tracking criminals, where they are, and when they're trying to find criminals, they're committing burglaries, robberies, things of that nature. They're just grabbing the license plate, she says. As I said before, is she really that dense, or is she just cynically lying to you? What I've told from law enforcement is that this is a very helpful tool. Yes, a very helpful tool to corrupt law enforcement. Look at this. How does that go again? If you aren't doing anything, wait, it'll come to me. Something wrong or something, nothing to hide. It's all on the tip of my tongue. And this person put up one document after the other. Police departments and sheriffs are adopting formal policies that officers should not mention the usage of these flock cameras to vehicle occupants or even put it in their reports. So why are you trying to hide this? Is this national security as well? Is that why we're going to bring the Chinese in? To say, well, we have to have our local police be secret police. They've got to operate like they're some kind of adjunct to the national security state. and you look at all the crimes that are being committed by these, by the police, many of them police chiefs and sheriffs, who are there using these cameras, and they typically put in test, and then they start following people that they're romantically involved with, or family members, or people they don't like. We've seen this happen over and over again. There's a regular stream of these things. I don't report on each and every one of them. I reported on several of these things, but it's become a non-story because it has happened so many times. She went on to say, Marsha Blackburn said, well, there are privacy concerns. You want to make certain that it's only used for reading the license plate. Again, you are completely ignoring the surveillance database that is there. She said, we've seen these cameras be very useful for helping spot fugitives from justice to, oh, no, I'm sorry, that's not her, this is Rose, to identify lawbreakers and help to bring criminals to justice. So they're both using that talking point. And that is an absolute lie. As a matter of fact, the number one priority for government must never be what expedites law enforcement. The number one priority, if we believe the Declaration of Independence, do we believe that? These are all people who were just waving the flag about the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, they don't believe a word of it. They don't believe that government was instituted to protect our life and liberty. It's all just about safety. And it's about making things efficient for law enforcement. We can't be bothered with search warrants, said Mike Johnson. You realize how long that would take? We can't burden our cops with following the law or the Constitution that they swore to hold as a condition of swearing into their office. Of course, the politicians don't do it either. Anyway, he continues and said they should only be used for official purposes. And so we got to make sure that's the case. What is the official purpose? He says, and we have to police it very carefully. Well, who polices the police? Who watches the watchers, right? That is the age-old question. And that is what Madison was concerned about. He said, because men are not angels, we have government. But what we see from Marsha Blackburn and Rose, they just say, well, this is just common sense. We have to have this for law enforcement. No, Thomas Paine's common sense says that government is a necessary evil, but it is evil, and it needs to be restrained, and you need to not ever give it this kind of concentrated power. Well, there's also a third person who's running in the primary, Monty Fritz, and I've interviewed him, and he doesn't have, unfortunately, a particular statement. He did not respond to them on this, but I've talked to him, and I know where he is on this issue. And he has the best position on this issue and on many other things. And unfortunately, he's not making this an issue. This is a bipartisan issue. This is a winning issue. People from every demographic and every political party hate these things. Run on that. Make that your issue. This is a missed opportunity if ever there was one. Now, the Democrat candidate is not missing this opportunity, and he's saying all the right things about this particular issue. Monty Fritz is right on this issue, but he's also right on other issues that the Democrat is not right on. So the Democrat, Tim Sear, says, both AI data centers and flock surveillance cameras get sold to the public as modern progress, but when you look under the hood, they are a real problem. Corporate interest, unchecked government surveillance, overriding the basic rights, health, and privacy of everyday people. That's exactly what this is. And so we're going to pause here in a moment, but we're going to pick this up on the other side. Let me just finish this. Public safety is critical, but turning Tennessee into an open-air surveillance zone does not make our communities safer, and we'll tell you why when we come back. Automated license plate readers do not just capture vehicles suspected of crimes. They continuously record, log, and map the movements of every citizen, going to work, to church, to school, or to the doctor. Collecting this data on innocent people without a warrant directly violates the Fourth Amendment. When paired with facial recognition, these automated systems have proven record of misidentifying people, disproportionately affecting people of color, and leading to dangerous traffic stops. And we have seen this over and over again. And we'll have more on this when we come back, folks. This, I think, is the issue of this next election. Unfortunately, some of the best candidates are not speaking to it directly. We'll be right back.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Well, if you're not guilty, what have you got to hide? Why do you care if we search you and we record you, right? We've heard this over and over again. What happens with the police, though? If you start recording them, they don't like it, especially if it's ICE. They've even got masks, and they get very aggressive with you if you start to record the police. Those particular police do. And, of course, the same thing is happening with Flock. Here's an individual who went to their facility and started taking pictures, and this is what happened.
Are you with Flock?
What?
Are you with Flock?
No, there's a construction firm I work with, CSD.
This man, James Boyce, is a former British Army veteran and a current Flock supply chain manager. Not only did he lie about working for Flock, which I'm guessing is probably normal at this company, but he also implied to Georgia law enforcement that I could have been armed, and we'll soon see if that puts my life in danger.
You're going to wait here until the manager talks.
You're holding me until that guy talks, but you're not telling me I'm going to be detained. Yeah, you are. Am I allowed to leave? Can I go in my car and leave? Are you safe right now, sir?
We've had reports that you've been to basically every Flock safety site and facility that you know of.
Correct.
Yeah, so...
Your surveillance is correct. We're doing our own surveillance.
So people don't really feel safe right now with people randomly trying to get into our sites and buildings.
Oh, wait. You don't feel safe being surveilled. Is that what you're saying?
Not at all, sir.
Because that's what you guys do to us without our consent.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting when you guys have this happen, you call the police.
So basically, Flock safety employees don't feel safe or do not like the fact that they're being surveilled the same way that they're surveilling American citizens.
That's right. And neither do the police, as we've seen over and over again. And neither does TSA. Remember that situation, Travis, when we were all traveling and Travis got separated from the rest of us. The whole family was traveling. And this one guy kind of let us go through without the heavy, we always refuse the body scanners, right? And so he let us go through since we had my young daughter and everything. So the four of us kind of went through and we got a light once over, but not the heavy thing. And then Travis comes through and they start giving him the heavy pat down and, body thing. And I started recording it, as I always do that. And the guy got really angry with it. He goes, I was really nice to you. And now you're recording this. I said, well, what's the issue if you're not doing anything wrong, right? And I said, look around here. You've got cameras everywhere recording everything that we're doing. But I'm not allowed to record you for my purposes. But you record everything we do. You put your hands on us. You want to scan us when we go through this stuff here. I'm not taking that from. That's no favor to me when you do that type of thing. So anyway, this is back to the Democrat who was running. He says,
also real quick, if people are interested, that clip that was played is from a YouTuber called Tommy G. So you can look him up on YouTube if you want to see the rest of it. It's like a 40-something minute video that he did, I want to say.
Good. Yes, so we should give him credit. Thank you for reminding me of that. Going back to the Democrat, listen to what he has to say. Now, again, forgetting your partisan issues and forgetting other issues that are out there, just on this one particular issue, these are where the candidates are going to shake out on this stuff. And I don't understand why Republican candidates won't strongly come out in opposition to these cameras. Is it because they love corporations too much? I see that all the time with Reason and with Cato, the libertarians. It's like, well, corporations can do no wrong. Again, I would see John Stossel at Reason saying, well, they censored me again on social media, but hey, they're corporations. They can do whatever they want as a corporation. No, they can't. They don't have any rights. Corporations are not people, regardless of what Mitt Romney said.
No, you don't understand. The boot is privately owned.
That's right. As it stomps on your face, right? So anyway, the Democrat says, as governor, I will ban utility boards and local governments from signing non-disclosure agreements regarding water, power, or land usage. That's right. That's what we should do. Listen to that, Republicans. Run on that. If you're an independent, run on it. I will mandate that any high-capacity computing facility either use closed-loop recycled water systems so our water stays protected. Corporations will pay every single cent for their own power grid upgrades rather than dumping those on the Tennessee taxpayers and electricity payers. Another candidate, who I think is also a Democrat in the primary, said, I support a statewide ban on data centers. Any potential benefits like job creation seem to pale in comparison to the destruction of the environment, community, and even the job loss associated with AI and data centers. Tennessee deserves a government that will act in the best interest of the people of Tennessee, not in the best interest of out-of-state mega companies who pollute our waters, overuse our utilities, and push people out of their community to make the rich richer. Again, they will go back to the issue of income inequality, which is what the Democrats will do. And this is really what the technocracy and what Trump and the Republicans are doing is actually feeding socialism, because they are pushing for this greater and greater concentration of power and wealth that comes with it. And people see that happening. I don't want to see us pushed into socialism and communism, but that is exactly what Trump and these technocrats are laying the foundation for. The same for the flock camera bans, he said. Ban them. If we could trust the government and law enforcement to only use the information gathered to solve crimes, quote unquote, that would be one thing. But the potential for outrageously unconstitutional misuse of the data collected is undeniable. That's exactly what we need. And I think that is a winning formula. If you could have a Republican who's not burdened with all the socialism and the LGBT insanity, if you got a Republican who would say those types of things, that's exactly what is needed. Well, this is a op-ed piece from someone who is writing this based on reactions in Johnson City, Tennessee. The debate over flock safety cameras is about as far from traffic enforcement. It's not about whether America should continue building the infrastructure for mass surveillance. So in other words, this is not, as Marsha Blackburn said, it's just about the license plate stuff. No, it's not about that. Maybe bad enough if that was what it was about, but it's not about that. She said, State Representative Bud Hulsey. And I tell you, Bud Hulsey is a good guy here. He's somebody that Senator Frank Nicely recommended I talk to. And I haven't gotten him on yet, but I got to get him on because he was the first one out of the gate with this. He had a very good bill. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. Just like you had Frank Nicely had an excellent bill about out-of-state financing. That did not pass. And then the out-of-state financing came for him. That's exactly what happened. Anyway, so she said, Bud Hulsey, before taking his bill about flock camera off notice, said, I'm going to go away, but I don't think this issue is going to go away. So you had Republican leadership shut this thing down on him. And he said, he quoted Supreme Court Justice William J. Brennan, who said, and listen to this, this is the key thing. When somebody tells you this is about safety and law enforcement, listen to this quote from the Supreme Court Justice. He said, the task of combating crime and convicting the guilty will in every era seem of such critical and pressing concern that we may be lured by the temptations of expediency into forsaking our commitment to protecting individual liberty and privacy. Is that not exactly what this is about? We've got to expedite the prosecution of crimes, and we don't care about liberty or privacy, or as a matter of fact, safety, because as we've seen several times, these systems have misidentified people, and we've had people who have been in jail for extended periods of time. They were so arrogant, so concerned, so certain, I should say, that they were right because this is a flock camera and it's an AI data center that's put all this stuff together. We've got you. And yet they had video that they were not allowed to introduce for quite some time that kept them in jail that showed that they were somewhere else. And so this false identification, a false positive, is a very dangerous thing. We've had several incidences of automotive journalists who were driving, and I forget the make of the car that kept having this problem, but there was something funky about their license plate. And so they would give these cars to the journalists to drive, and this license tag had somehow gotten into the database as a stolen car. And so the police pull them over, and police pull over somebody with a stolen car. They are ready to shoot you. And they come up there with their hand on the gun if they don't have it pulled on you. That's a very dangerous situation. And these are just automotive journalists. This is the danger of this over and above the abuse that's done by some cops who are using it for their own private, personal investigation, we should say. Then conducted, he says, as constitutional principle wanes, said Bud Hulsey, I think you will find that tyranny becomes casual. Yeah, you get accustomed to it. When the constitutional protections go away, then the tyranny becomes really casual. We already see that with ICE, don't we? The question needs to be asked, should we trade liberty for safety, and where does all this go? Data centers have become part of the infrastructure that makes large-scale surveillance possible. In Johnson City, approximately 6,000 residents participated in a public survey. The respondents said they were extremely concerned, and that approximately 95% of them expressed high or extreme concern overall. In Knox County, that's where Glenn Jacobs was talking about the flock cameras and putting a moratorium on them, really not a ban, but a moratorium, until we can figure out how to control them. Well, I figured out that they can't be controlled. That's the reality of all this stuff. The Knoxville Police Department has a Connect Knoxville program that encourages residents and businesses to voluntarily register their private security cameras so investigators know where the cameras are located and can request footage following incidents. Participation is voluntary, but together these initiatives illustrate how public-private surveillance networks become increasingly interconnected. And this is what's happening across the country. Amazon pulled their Ring cameras back from this because of the criticism, but there's still a lot of doorbell cameras that the police want you to tell them where these things are so they can come around and look and use this as a surveillance situation. And some of them are done in real time, as a matter of fact. And so this is the way that it is rolling out in America, not in China. In China, the government just comes in and says, well, we're going to do that. The tyranny has become casual. But here in America, they have to pretend that this is private. They have to pretend, well, this is a private home or a private church or mosque or whatever. They voluntarily want to use a flock camera, and they're more than willing to let that become a part of the global system for flock. And so we have to pretend that it is a private choice that is there, and we can't interfere with that. No, if somebody is out there endangering life, you don't just let it go because it's a corporation, or you don't excuse it because it's not being done specifically by government. Government is actually using these things, and they're actually behind all of this, and they are incentivizing and bribing people to do this. But the reality is that government should stop this when private individuals do it. The purpose of government is to protect our liberty. That's why we have government. Same reason that we have government to try to stop people from getting shot. And, you have the police come in a mass shooting situation, or they're doing an investigation about crime. What's the justification for that if the police don't investigate crime that's committed by these AI data centers and the flock camera network? And it is a crime. It is a crime against the Constitution. It is a crime against our basic human rights. It is a crime to set up a surveillance network and then pretend, oh, I promise that we won't misuse this. Give me a break. Conservatives have long argued that government should investigate suspects, not monitor everybody in hopes of finding a suspect. So Republicans should believe in limited government, individual liberty, and constitutional protections, not in surveillance systems that record the movements of millions of law-abiding citizens. But that is exactly what they're embracing. That is what Trump is embracing. As a matter of fact, Trump said when they were talking about extending Section 702 to allow warrantless searches by the national surveillance state, that's what we should call it instead of the national security system, he said, well, I'm willing to give up my rights in order to help the military with this kind of stuff. Well, he's not willing to give up any rights. If you look at this guy, he sues everybody that he thinks even infringes on his ego. He's not willing to give up any rights. He's willing to give up your rights so that he has more power over you. And as a matter of fact, he knows where this is all headed. He even talked about 6G and how that is going to be used to surveil inside of you. Listen to this.
So we're into 6G now. I just 5G. I was a leader on 5G, getting that done, and now they're up to 6.
Let's do it again.
What does that do? Give you a little bit deeper view into somebody's skin? See how perfect it is? I like the cameras the old days. So they just had a nice feature. Now they cover every little. Let's see, Michael, you're in good shape. You're not gonna. But I tell you, it's the 6 is coming, huh?
Yeah, he knows. He knows what 6G does. It actually does do that. And when he was pushing 5G, I was pushing back on that. I said, they're out there telling you, what do they do when they push 5G? Same game plan. Well, we've got to make sure that Huawei doesn't have the ability to do this, because if a Chinese company is going to put out these 5G, roll out this 5G network here in the United States, we got to ban them from that, because look at all the information they could get about us. It's like, okay, so if it's done by the American government, that's not a problem. It's only a problem if it's done by the Chinese. You say this is a problem if the Chinese have it because you know how you, the American government, are going to use this. That's what I said about the 5G stuff when Trump was rolling it out. Yeah, it was the next level for this kind of, the higher broadband they get, the more information they can transfer, and the more information they can transfer about you. And yet it does not do anything to stop crime. Here is a report from Futurism. Flock surveillance cameras are actually horrible for fighting crime. And this comes from FBI data. The public has been asked to accept a significant expansion of surveillance based on the promise that it would dramatically improve public safety. That is not even remotely true. As a matter of fact, since the launch of Flock Safety, quote unquote, in 2017, the ACLU estimates that the company installed some 100,000 license plate readers throughout the United States. The dragnet comes with plenty of downsides to privacy and to civil liberties. It can be abused by crooked cops, as we've seen over and over again. It can be powered by sweatshop labor, or nearly impossible to escape once it designates you as a target, or if it falsely identifies you. Police officials, however, insist that it's worth the trade-off, because it helps them to get the bad guys, right? Wrong. In Atlanta, Georgia, and this is where the Flock headquarters is, they have experienced far away the largest influx of these automated license plate readers in the country. Over 5,000 Flock cameras in Atlanta, blanketing the city. Yet, as bombshell data released by the FBI shows, the city's massive web of surveillance has virtually zero impact on the Atlanta Police Department's ability to solve crime. So think about this. That was the first city. They've got 5,000 cameras all over Atlanta. Has it done anything for the crime rate? Actually, no, not at all. Most amazing thing is that you would think that for vehicle crime, for stolen cars and things like that, that would be its bailiwick, right? That would be the key thing it would be used for. And yet it hasn't helped with that at all either. Certainly hasn't helped with other serious crimes in terms of robbery, in terms of murder, rape, all these other things. The FBI data is a damning refutation of Flock's primary claim that the cameras are necessary to help officers keep the public safe. The rates at which the APD resolves crimes like homicide, robbery, miscellaneous larceny, and shoplifting laws have actually decreased since they put in the Flock network, starting in 2021, when the city's build-out hit its full stride in 2025. So they looked at it. What was it in 2021 when this started? What was it in 2025 by the time they got 5,000 of these things networked all over the city? For homicide, the numbers are especially embarrassing. The FBI reporting case closures at just 48% in 2025, down from 53.5% in 2021. So it went from 53 to 48% in terms of homicide after they put in the Flock cameras. Don't talk to me about how this is necessary for the police. It's not at all. As a matter of fact, like much of the technology, it might actually make them lazier, just like we see with AI all the time. It makes everybody worse at their job because they start to atrophy. Meanwhile, rape remained flat year over year, building at a steady rate, 37% closure rate from 2021 to 2025, dipping down to only 21% at its lowest point in that 4-year span. Though the Atlanta Police Department actually did show some improvement on some crime categories as Flock cameras sprout up over the city, the changes from 2021 to 2025 amount to little more than rounding errors. For example, case closures on crimes like aggravated assault and motor vehicle theft tipped up at just 0.2 and 0.3%. One would think that motor vehicle theft solving rates would be an easy win for technology that is designed to track cars specifically. Yet in 2025, the Atlanta Police Department was solving just 1 out of 10 cases of auto theft, even with 5,000 flock cameras at its disposal. The public has been asked to accept a significant expansion of surveillance based on the promise that it would dramatically improve public safety. It is always a fool's bargain, isn't it? There's always the promise of safety, but you will give up your actual liberty first. So you lose the liberty, then you find out the promise is worthless. And, it's a really kind of a prison state logic. It really is a prison state when you create a surveillance state. Of course, if you're in a prison, assuming that the guards will do something to protect you, which in many cases they don't, you can get attacked by other inmates, that type of thing is very common. But you're right there, you're in a cell, you got bars there that's going to protect you. You got people watching over you all the time. Isn't that a great thing? And yet we are seeing in the prisons, even though you've given up all of your liberty, you are still not safe. You can be abused by the prison guards, you can be abused by other prisoners, and they don't do anything about it. And you can also go to prison and overdose and die on drugs. I've talked many times about the mother in Maryland who turned in her son because he was a drug addict and she could never get him off of drugs. She kept sending him all these different rehab programs. None of them worked. So she called the police on him. She thought, well, I'll put him in jail and he'll go cold turkey, and that'll be one way for him to get off the drugs. Instead, he died of an overdose of drugs in prison. And that happens very frequently, especially with the federal prisons. So if you go back and trace this all the way back, it goes back to Jeffrey Epstein's money and a former Israeli prime minister. They tell you the flock cameras are there to fight crime. So I pulled the actual police logs from my new favorite website, haveibeenflocked.com. And here's what fighting crime actually looks like. 84% of these things had no case number at all. The most common reason a cop typed into the box was blank, nothing. Only 9% were even tagged as a real crime. Test and training showed up as reasons run on real people's cars. And this is what we've seen over and over again from police chiefs and sheriffs who abused this, in many cases got fired because they're using this to check on their ex-wife or their former girlfriend or something. The FBI and Homeland Security wired into local camera networks in your town, and your town never even signed off on all of this stuff. Flock's AI turns your license plate into you. Your name, your address, your family, everyone you know in seconds. No warrant. Signal Trace, a competitor's tool that tracks the Bluetooth off of your phone, your AirPods, your watch. It doesn't even need your plate. The lead investigator behind Flock also funds an Israeli company that can hack cameras and can change the footage. Another lead investigator backs a 911 app that flips on your phone's camera and mic. Trace it all the way back and you hit a former Israeli prime minister and Jeffrey Epstein's money. But they tell you, don't be afraid of this, right? It's China that is doing this. It's not Israel that's doing it. It's China that is doing all this stuff. China is not allied, by the way, with Palantir. Israel is. So, again, when we go back to Knox County that we talked about before, the police are eagerly trying to get everybody to give them their doorbell cameras and their locations, register that with them. There's a big push at the county commission level, so much so that Glenn Jacobson, the mayor, pushed back on it and said, well, let's figure out how we're going to regulate and control these things to a little bit degree before we rush into this as well. But if you go back to Knox County, this is reported by Tennessee Stands. And by the way, Tennessee Stands is if you are in Tennessee, a resident, it's another source. John Birch Society's got a great source in terms of ranking state and federal elected politicians, but he does it for the state area. And it's always good to have multiple ones of these because you can you can compare these things and look to see if there's a particular issue that one organization might have been weighting very heavily, and maybe you don't weight it that much. So it's always good to have multiple ways to look at this. And you need to find, there's usually organizations in every state, and of course John Birch Society does collect this information in every state to help you get that information to be educated as a voter as to where these guys stand, because they'll tell you all kinds of tales when they're running for office. But the By their fruit, you'll know them. So this leads you, they've had a survey that has been put out. If you are residents of Knox County, said Tennessee Stands, they have seen a lot of people reporting that they get this survey in Knox County. It's called Neighbors for Strong Communities. This is an organization that does not exist. And they're asking you to take a survey regarding the importance of mass surveillance flock cameras. I wonder who could be behind this. There's no such organization, but there is a network of flock cameras. The link leads you through a series of questions under the assumption that this data is being taken to help the county commissioners make their decisions. The data from this survey is being retrieved by an unknown source, stored without access by the public, without any way of knowing where the data is being sent. This is exactly like the data that's being taken daily by these flock cameras. The only difference being that it's our own local governments who have access to it. The public cannot access the pictures themselves without a FOIA request. The public has no way of knowing when the data is being shared to another local or to a state government. If Representative Hulsey's bill would have passed, our state would not be in this situation, and the privacy of citizens would be protected in Tennessee. That's right. And, you know, when we look at this, there's so many different places that they surveil us. Again, when we look at the long-term plans of the technocracy and, you know, the people who are seeking to overthrow Western civilization and the foundations of Western civilization, I'm talking about the types of things that we see in the Bill of Rights. The people who are overthrowing that, they don't have just a single plan. They always have multiple vectors on which they're going to come after you. And here's another one of these. Remember one of the people who out there famously said, well, you know, if you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't be worried about this. That was Eric Schmidt who said that. We've had other technocrats who have said that lie as well. But of course, Eric Schmidt was with Google for quite some time. Here's what happens with a Google phone. This is a Fox News report in Washington, D.C. He's got two phones, and he doesn't have a SIM card in either one of them. And they're not connected to any Wi-Fi network either. And as a matter of fact, one of the two phones is even in airplane mode. Look at what Google can find out about you and your movements in this report.
We know that Google is tracking us. We agree to it when we set up our phones. So we wanted to figure out what exactly Google is learning about us throughout the day. So here's what we're going to do. We have two identical phones. The only difference between these two phones is this one is in airplane mode. Both of the phones lack a SIM card, and they haven't been set up to access any Wi-Fi networks. So for all intents and purposes, these phones have no connection to a data network. We're going to keep them with us throughout the day. And while I travel around D.C., we're going to figure out just what Google is finding out about me.
Our first stop, Sim's convenience store just outside of Foxbury, for a quick coffee. From there, we took a walk to the Capitol and took a quick walk around the Senate office buildings, and then decided to hop in a car and head around town.
Hello.
Going to the Children's Hospital, please? To run our test, we had to do more than walk a block, so we took a tour around our nation's capital. First, due north to the Children's National Medical Center Hospital, then west to St. Albans School and the National Cathedral. Our tour around town was a 14-mile journey that lasted more than an hour. The entire time, the phones had no access to the internet.
Oh my goodness.
Not a Wi-Fi connection and not any cellular data service. It almost seemed quaint to assume that Google wouldn't even be able to collect data on me.
Let's head back to the bureau, my friend.
Yeah, well, we got to take a break at the top of the hour. When we come back, we'll finish this report, and I'll tell you exactly how this turned out. You won't believe it.
Targeted ad.
Making sense common again. You're listening to The David Knight Show.
All right, welcome back. I'm sorry I had to break that report. We're going to pick that up, and Travis is going to try to drop the needle here in the middle of that report so you can hear the conclusion. If you can't do that, I can summarize it. I've seen this thing. Go ahead, Travis.
If you go ahead and punch it up for me.
Okay, sure. That'll be fine. Let's see. Here we are. Where is it? Here we are.
We know that Google is tracking us. We agree to it when we set up our that lasted more than an hour. The entire time, the phones had no access to the internet.
Oh my goodness.
Not a Wi-Fi connection and not any cellular data service. It almost seemed quaint to assume that Google wouldn't even be able to collect data on me.
Let's head back to the bureau, my friend. Oh, that church is beautiful.
Google's business model is simple. Collect data on its users and then use that data to sell targeted ads. It's a business model called surveillance capitalism. But does that critical data collection work even when your phones aren't connected?
So we're back here at our Fox bureau in D.C., and we've got both of our phones exactly how we left with them. The only difference, really, I snapped a couple of bad selfies at the National Cathedral. But otherwise, they have stayed in my pocket for the entire day. So let's find out what they know. This is our man-in-the-middle device. It's basically a Wi-Fi network that these phones are going to connect to once we turn their Wi-Fi on. It's going to pass data through it on the way to Google, but on the way, we're actually going to get a copy of the same data that Google's going to get. We'll be able to decrypt it and then find out where we've been throughout the day.
Within minutes, the numbers rolled in. The phone that wasn't on airplane mode registered more than 100 locations, 130 activities, and even 152 barometric readings. As soon as it hooked up to our Wi-Fi, it transmitted 300 kilobytes of data straight to Google. The phone even logged our exact locations, tracking us all around town, the Capitol, the hospital, the school, and the cathedral.
Now you may notice what's missing here is the exact route that we took, but it got that data too. It knows when I got out of the car.
The metadata has a time log down to the very second, tracking everything when they think that you're walking, riding, and yes, even getting out of the car.
Okay, so you're thinking, this isn't a big deal. I'll just put my phone in airplane mode. Yeah, we thought of that too. This is the other phone that we had with us that no SIM card also remained in airplane mode the entire time. Let's see what kind of data it captured.
The phone with airplane mode activated actually logged more locations and activities than the other phone, and it also transferred hundreds of kilobytes of data to Google as soon as it was activated.
The only thing that's missing from this map is our stop at the Children's Hospital, but it still knows we were there. There it is. Exiting vehicle, 100% accuracy.
Through complicated user agreements and free software, Google gets users to sign away their privacy for nothing. They're even following you in the places that most people would expect total privacy: government buildings, a children's hospital, a private school, a church. Every move you make, every step you take, Google is watching you.
Yeah, not Sting. I'll be watching you every move you make, every step you take, right? Well, you know, that's isn't that amazing, the fact that it is logging all that stuff even before you set the thing up. Right? He doesn't even have SIM cards in them, and it's logging all that stuff and going to report it back to Google as soon as possible. And this is the basis of geospatial intelligence. As Caitlin Johnstone says, in terms of where the technocracy is trying to take us, and these people in Silicon Valley, she said they're trying to make us worse. These billionaire generative AI corporations reap profits by making us worse human beings. They want us to become less human, less connected. They want to atrophy our ability to speak, to write, to learn how to research, how to relate, how to draw, how to make music, how to cultivate intimate connections with the most important people in our lives, and then sell those things back to us in the hands of some chatbot. Take your life away and then say, here it is if you pay me, all right? The entire business model is built around turning us into a bunch of people who can't manage our own lives, our own relationships, and then selling us the crutch that we use to compensate for that self-inflicted debilitation. The actual product that they're selling is freedom from cognitive and emotional discomfort, from the discomfort of learning new skills, from the discomfort of personal growth, from the discomfort of taking risks, from the discomfort of having to think about other people and consider their interests and feelings, from the discomfort of having to interact with other humans and maybe say the wrong thing sometimes, from the discomfort of leaping into the unknown. But all the best things in life sit on the other side of discomfort. They're encouraging us to spend our lives curled up in an impotent little ball of emotional infancy and intellectual stagnation so they can sell us machines which act as a digital prosthesis for the sacred parts of ourselves that we have amputated. That's pretty well put by Caitlin Johnstone. And of course, she has a lot of remedies that she looks at. She's not a Christian, but if you stop and think about this, God puts us through difficult things in our lives. He puts us through discomfort. And the purpose of all that is really for growth. And she understands that from the standpoint that she can see that they are amputating these things out of our lives. They are anesthetizing us. Pain can be a very important thing. It can be something that can actually save your life. If you didn't feel pain, you might not realize that you've got a severe cut that's going to cause you to bleed to death. So she said, let's face our discomfort. Let's face our fears. Let's take that risk. And she said, let's learn about the people in our lives. Let's nurture our relationships, become better people. She said, they're trying to pull us away from our humanity. So our response should be to plunge deeper into it. As things get more and more dystopian, simply holding fast to your humanity becomes an act of rebellion. I couldn't agree with her more about that. I think she's absolutely right. And of course, the more people learn about AI, the more they want it out of their lives. This is from Futurism. This is a new poll that came out. The peanut gallery on social media happily embraced the early image generation models. They thought it was fun. But on paper, surveys found that public attitudes toward this technology continued to improve into 2025 before there was a sharp reversal. What do you think might be causing that? We haven't still seen, we've seen a lot of layoffs from some of the tech companies. Whether or not they're able to actually replace the engineers that they're firing or not with AI, they're going to fire them anyway. Their products may just become crappier, and they are becoming crappier, but they will do that. Nevertheless, the thing that has really turned this around is apparently people understanding what's going on with the surveillance state. Americans are increasingly wary about data centers. A recent Politico survey finding that 41% of U.S. adults would oppose it. Oppose data centers being built within 3 miles of their home, up drastically from 28% in January. There's a lot of people then that don't understand what a nuisance these things are when they're right next to you. Not only do AI haters dislike the tech in their own personal sphere, they're also increasingly scrutinizing their friends, their family, and their coworkers about their attitudes. And so in 2026, America's honeymoon phase with AI seems to be wearing off. The percentage of U.S. adults who think AI does more harm than good is rising from 31% in 2025 to 39% this year, while only 9% think that the tech does more good than harm. So 91% of the people are either don't think that it does more good than harm. Some people think that it does a lot of harm. There is a moral and political judgment that is coming along with AI usage, especially in the creative industries where the stigma is the strongest. A 37-year-old public health professional in New York City that they talked to in this article said, I hear people champion AI, and I'm like, sure. Why don't we all participate in our collective downfall? Why don't we all just play a part in diminishing our humanity and degrading the environment? And of course, they're coming from the left, so they don't even look at liberty. Meanwhile, NewsGuard backer is Publicis is now buying an ad tech company that pitched blacklists as an anti-racism tool. And again, when you look at anti-racism, I interviewed a number of years ago Shi Van Fleet, who grew up in China, and she came to America. She's very strong in terms of her American citizenship. She wrote a book called Mao's America, A Survivor's Warning. And in that, she talked about how anti-racism is exactly what the Chinese Communist government under Mao did. They called it struggle sessions. It wasn't enough, for example, when we look at racism, it's not enough to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. So you got to join them in the struggle, and you have to oppose anybody that you think shows any exhibit of racism, whether or not it is conscious. It might even be some unconscious bias. We got to ferret out everybody, and it is a struggle that they use to pit everyone against everyone else. Well, NewsGuard, which has been, it actually has been the bane of Gard Goldsmith for the longest time. I've heard him talk about it many times, how they've got to go back and adjust things because they can't, when he was working for MRC, they'd have to adjust it because they kept constantly demonetizing them. And that's exactly what they do. They use the monetization of ads as a way to censor people. NewsGuard has signed a $2.2 billion deal to acquire LiveRamp, another ad tech company whose former head of products argued in Forbes that ad blocking technology was part of the tech industry's fight against racism. They're going to bring the two companies together who have a history of online censorship. So what could possibly go wrong with that? Well, we know exactly where this is going to be headed. You have, in April, the FTC entered a consent decree with Publicis and barred them and two other agencies from coordinating to withhold advertising from websites and platforms that they didn't like their politics or what they had to say about any particular topic. However, this new company was not a party to any of that. And if we go back and look at the government's involvement, we see they got $750,000 from the Department of Defense to track misinformation. This is NewsGuard that got that money from the DOD. The Department of Defense is very heavily into censorship. Oh, for national security, of course, right? Wrong. Though Publicis Group signed the FTC's decree, its merger with LiveRamp, LiveRamp has not disavowed its previous stance in support of blacklisting designs and ad tech. So perhaps it'll get some scrutiny from the FTC, or maybe it won't. Because when we look at the Trump administration, what is happening is a pattern of behavior, not only suing companies if he doesn't like news companies, if he doesn't like the stories that they did about them. Remember the lawsuit against CBS? He typically sues them for $10 billion, and he held up the CBS sale. And in order to get that to move forward, they settled with him out of court. And that was over the editing of an interview that they had with Lala Harris. And she did come across as very la-la even in the edited interviews. But that is something that news organizations always have to do. They got to fit everything into a time schedule. And Trump should understand that. He's been part of TV. That's what made him famous. And he won the election, but his ego was offended. And he thought they made her look too good. That's another area where I disagree with him. I don't think they made her look good at all. But they put out a trailer, and the trailer was edited, obviously. And then they obviously had to edit the segment. So he said, you manipulated this to make her look good, and sued him. It was a garbage lawsuit. Same thing is being done now with the BBC, another $10 billion lawsuit. And he's trying to back off from that because the BBC is aggressively going after Discovery to find some documents about J6 that he doesn't want to have made public. But he's also doing other things. We've seen him through the FCC, the organization that's supposedly going to be there to patrol any trespass of frequencies and warn about that. He's used the FCC to go after content in terms of these late night comedians and other things like that, saying we're going to suspend your license. Now you've got a U.S. reporter who is fighting back after Border Patrol seized his cell phones. They didn't like his reporting. And who didn't like it? Well, in this particular case, it was Laura Loomer who came after him. This is Max Blumenthal. He's Jewish, but he is also anti-Zionist. And he went to cover, along with a lot of other news organizations, CNN, all these other news organizations were in Tehran to cover the funeral of the Ayatollah. Max Blumenthal went there to cover the funeral of the Ayatollah. And he said, when we went to a cafe in Tehran one night to upload videos from his reporting about the funeral, he began seeing social media posts from Laura Loomer targeting him, including one that suggested that he should be taken off the plane by U.S. Marshals when he lands back in the U.S. and detained. You know, there's a lot of people saying that about Tucker Carlson because of his interview with Vladimir Putin. And I thought Vladimir Putin pretty much owned him in that interview. And I thought it was kind of sad, and I said it at the time, that he was cheering the subway system that said, look at how beautiful this subway system is here. And it's like, man, do you realize what the people gave up for that? It's like the situation we had at the town council meeting in Raleigh. We had a Democrat before the Soviet Union fell who went to the Soviet Union. She came back and she wanted to have a public transportation system for the little town of Raleigh, which did not need it at all. And she said, it's wonderful. In Russia, I can go anywhere I wanted to for a nickel. It's like, you don't realize the true cost when you have turned over your economy and your job and your livelihood and whether or not you have a house. Go read some Alexander Solzhenitsyn and see what happens when the government puts you on a communist universal basic income system, which is what these technocrats are wanting to do. When you give up everything, that ride on the subway doesn't cost you a nickel. The cost is incalculable. And so we see that happening now again. We've got people calling for, Tucker Carlson punish him or put out a referral for crimes for talking to people. Look, if you don't agree with Tucker Carlson, you don't agree. That's what the First Amendment is about. She should be adult enough that you could take somebody else's opinion and stand up to it. So what happened was they did come after him, and they did take both of his phones. Interestingly enough, they did not come after his laptop or his digital cameras. They didn't return the cell phones for a week. The U.S. federal government said they couldn't get into the phones, and they returned them. And therefore, the motion was moot. But Blumenthal went back to court on Wednesday and got a judge to agree that the government has to prove by supplying evidence of who had his phones, when they had them, and what they did to them. The federal judge says that the government has 14 days to prove that they didn't break into his phones. His treatment in this case pose serious constitutional problems, says the Freedom of Press Foundation. The Trump administration is finding any excuse it can to target journalists that it dislikes, and border searches are just one more play in this playbook. The judge, as a matter of fact, cited a recent case where which is ongoing as well. I'll talk about that here in just a second, where the federal agent showed up at the door of someone who wrote a piece for the New York Times and wanted to know who their source was. So the judge cited a recent 4th District ruling that distinguished a basic cell phone search when the phone's owner allows the agent to open the phone from an advanced search during which equipment, wired or wireless, is used to copy and or analyze the contents of an electronic device. She said, I now believe that under Fourth Circuit case law, a search warrant would be required for the degree of intrusion into a cell phone, said the judge. Well, stop and think about that. As I've said before, when you look at the Fourth Amendment, the people who wrote it at that point in time, what did they have? They had personal papers, things that they had written down. And that was what they were talking about. But in general, the principle that is behind the Fourth Amendment, when we talk about your personal papers and your personal effects and that type of thing, cell phones are far beyond anything that they could imagine in terms of the details of your life. There wasn't anything that was keeping a log of where everybody went on their horse in 1776. So this is much worse than the power that tyrants had at that point in time, but it nevertheless is what we come to expect from human nature and the nature of tyranny. So the second recent case involved the federal government's attempt to seek the discovery of sources of a journalist, and they tried to subpoena the New York Times. That is now being fought in court, as a matter of fact. And that is about a case that is coming out of the Department of Justice. This is about a report on a failed SEAL Team 6 mission in North Korea that was done under Trump. Remember that? We talked about that a couple of months ago. And that was a situation where Trump deployed the SEAL Team 6 people to plant some monitoring devices in North Korea. And as they were leaving, they saw some people who saw them, and one of them killed those. They were just fishermen. Killed them and then punctured their lungs so they would float, so they would sink to the bottom of the ocean. And that only just recently came to light, and there were sources who gave that information to this guy. And so now the Department of Defense, War Pete, who hates the press, hates any information that is out there because, national security about everything. Again, and part of it is Zionist leanings, I think. The Zionists are proud of their murders, just like War Pete. They want to censor everybody that is not with them, just like War Pete. They don't want to have any criticism of anything they do. And so that is what is ongoing now with a freelance reporter for the New York Times. And the subpoena had not been previously disclosed, but that came out a couple of months ago after the story came out. The investigators are seeking his testimony about 2 years' worth of information from his contacts and his conversations, as they try to identify his source for the article about the operation in North Korea. His lawyer said in a statement that he's dedicated his professional life to bringing official misconduct to light and to informing the public about the workings of its government. He said he will not be intimidated by the continuing that important work. He will defend press freedom and the First Amendment from this administration's brazen attacks on journalists. He will honor his commitment to his sources. And that is the most important thing, isn't it? If you're going to talk about having sources, you want to be able to get any information if you're going to turn into an informant. And we honor that kind of privilege when we talk about lawyers, when we talk about priests and that type of thing. So that is an important part about First Amendment freedoms. And we know that Trump despises the First Amendment. He despises the free press. He wants a sycophantic press, just like he wants sycophantic Republicans. But what about the Second Amendment? Where is he on the Second Amendment? Well, it turns out, as you might expect, that he's not real big on the Second Amendment either. Before we leave this, it said the Justice Department declined to comment. They said in a statement that it would use all available legal tools to uncover those who unlawfully disclose national defense information. But they won't use those legal tools to go after the Epstein pedophiles, will they? No. They will go after somebody that they allege had damaged the reflecting pond, but they won't go after the Epstein people. So what do pro-Second Amendment groups think about the Trump administration, the Department of Justice, Todd Blanche, the guy who won't go after the Epstein people? He is now defending the National Firearms Act. You got a lot of people who, in this bill that was passed last year, you may realize that they tried to get rid of the prohibitions on short-barrel shotguns and things that had effectively what they call a silencer, a suppressor. What they did instead was they reduced the fee on those things to $0 because you had the Senate parliamentarian got involved with all this. And, who is that? Well, that is supposedly a nonpartisan bureaucrat advisor who looks through the laws and says, well, this doesn't have anything to do with finances, so we don't need to have a supermajority. We can just, vice versa. So they have some things require 2/3 majority, others that just need a simple majority. So she makes that determination, and even though that's just advice that she gives, that is typically always taken. And so they removed the removal of the prohibition of things like suppressors, silencers, if you will. And so the response was that the Senate said, well, we're going to reduce those fees down to $0. Now, the interesting thing is that some of the Second Amendment organizations like Gun Owners of America have come out and said, well, this was all passed on the basis that this was a tax. And of course, there's a precedent for that as well. If you remember Obamacare, you had John Roberts who had written, well, the government can't mandate health insurance. That's absurd. He wrote that opinion, and then everybody thought that Obamacare was going to fail. And then at the last minute, he wrote the opinion for the other side. He went exactly the opposite and said, yes, we can have Obamacare. And I still think that the guy was blackmailed. I don't know whenever there's been a situation where you got one Supreme Court justice who wrote both the winning opinion and the dissenting opinion at the same time. And what he said in terms of passing Obamacare, if you remember, he said, well, it's not a mandate, it's a tax. We're going to treat it as a tax. Well, that's what these people are saying. They're saying, well, since there is no tax on these different things, the suppressors and these other things, therefore, the National Firearms Act, which was based on the fact that it was a tax and justified based on that, clearly the Second Amendment would prohibit the federal government from doing any gun control. So what they said was, well, this is not gun control. This is a tax. They said, well, now you remove the tax, so remove the gun control. Congress passed the NFA explicitly premised on its enumerated power to lay and to collect taxes. And the Supreme Court upheld provisions of the NFA on that basis, holding that the NFA was only a taxing measure, and that the registration provisions were obviously supportable in the aid of that taxing purpose. And so now the NRA, the Second Amendment Foundation, Firearms Policy Coalition have all argued that the NFA needs to be removed. But the Trump Department of Justice is arguing for this thing to be retained. Isn't that interesting? Who would have thought that Trump would be against the Second Amendment? Well, I guess that would be the people who would think that would be the people who didn't pay any attention to him establishing a precedent of gun control by executive order when he did it over a thing that was really unimportant, and that's the bump stock issue. The National Rifle Association just took a pass on that. Gun Owners of America, however, pushed that. They said, this is a very important principle. And I agreed with that. That's what I was saying at the time. And, of course, immediately after he did that, Lala Harris was also running for president. She said, well, if I'm elected president, I'm going to give Congress 100 days to pass my gun control measures. And if they don't do it, I'll do what Trump just did. I'll do it by executive order. And you had Biden also follow the Trump precedent and do gun control by executive order. That's the way these things go. That's why I call him Precedent Trump. He has set one precedent after the other to destroy the Constitution. Well, there's an interesting case about home-based Bible study and prayer that is coming out of Michigan and, Ohio. This particular case, it's a guy who is an Orthodox Jewish man in Ohio, and he wants to have this prayer meeting. They call it a minyan. It requires at least 10 men to be present. And so you've got people who are nosy neighbors who say, well, we don't like this, and they created some problems for him with a local town council and got them to send out a cease and desist letter. They said he was violating zoning laws. And this is something that we've seen happening to Christians who have home Bible studies in the past. They'll say, well, when you all get together, we've got all these cars that are parked in the road here because you don't have enough room for them in your driveway. It's a big issue and you're not zoned for this. And so we're going to say that you can't do this. And so he said, well, this is actually a stupid canard that you've got in terms of talking about traffic and things like that. Because he said, we meet on the Sabbath and we're not allowed to drive a car on the Sabbath. So there's no cars here. People are walking here. And so he got involved with the zoning process. Eventually what he did was he backed off. The zoning process went on and on and on. So eventually he just withdrew from it. And they continued to come after him. So he tried to sue them in court. And the court said, no, you don't have any ability to sue because you didn't go through the zoning process. So he is appealing it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is saying, yeah, we'll hear that because this is not really about the zoning issue or whether or not you can have a religious meeting in the privacy of your own home. This is about whether or not you have to go through this process, which can be drug out forever before you can get a determination as to what you are allowed to do. So they're going to hear that. It'll be a very interesting case. We're going to talk more about that when we come back. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Hello, it's me, Volodymyr Zelensky. I'm so tired of wearing these same t-shirts everywhere for years. You'd think with all the billions I've skimmed off America, I could dress better. And I could, if only David Knight would send me one of his beautiful gray MacGuffin hoodies or a new black t-shirt with the MacGuffin logo in blue. But he told me to get lost. Maybe one of you American suckers can buy me some at thedavidknightshow.com. You should be able to buy me several hundred. Those amazing sand-colored microphone hoodies are so beautiful. I'd wear something other than green military cosplay to my various galas and social events. If you want to save on shipping, just put it in the next package of bombs and missiles coming from the USA.
Yeah, welcome back. We were just talking about this particular case, and I've seen this case more than once. This particular one is an Orthodox Jewish guy. He needs to get 10 men together in order to have a service or whatever. But I've seen this from a lot of people who had home Bible studies or whatever. And I always paid attention to that because we had the same type of thing for years. About how many people did we have, Travis, that would come? I'm thinking in terms of adults, we probably had about 10, I guess, and about that many kids, I guess, as well, because we had a couple of big homeschool families that would come there.
Yeah, it fluctuated from time to time, so it's hard to keep an exact head count, but 20 sounds about right.
Yeah, nobody ever complained about it because I guess they really didn't know if we were having it or not. We live on a road that there was only 2 houses on this road, and at the end of the road was a woman. I never complained to any authorities about her. She started having these pagan ceremonies on all these different witches' Sabbaths and stuff. And I started noticing the timing of all these different things. And one day I went out on the porch. You could hear it. It sounded like they were outside chanting and beating drums because we live way out in the woods. And it sounded like there was a machine that was going on. I thought, somebody doing some work at this time of night because it was late at night. And I walked out on the deck and I could hear the chanting and the flute and all the rest of the stuff. And it's like, okay, I'd already noticed because she'd put luminaries down the road to show people where the house was. So I'd already noticed that it happened 2 or 3 times. So just went back in the house and got some big boom boxes and started playing Christian music. That was the last time that she ever did that. I guess that was kind of a damper on that. But if I can hear your music inside my house with the doors and windows closed, then I'm sure that you can hear what I'm playing out here with the boom box. But anyway, I think that is paramount. The home has always been sacrosanct in terms of you don't come in here without a search warrant. You can, they let people stop us in our cars and that type of thing because, when these principles were established, people didn't have cars. And so as they add these new things, now we got computers. So now the protection against your personal papers is no longer in effect because now it's on a computer, it's not on paper. These kind of prevarications are eroding the fundamental principles that the Bill of Rights was set up to protect. And so in issue after issue, they're doing that. And so your home, as well as your religious liberty, is being violated by this. And I think that is outrageous. Well, as I said at the beginning of the program, we had, and I talked about this last week when I began the program, I said I think it's very important for us to oppose some of the things that we see being done as Christians. It bothered me a great deal to see a lot of pro-life organizations, pro-family organizations, Christian leaders that are looked up to by a lot of people, to see them go to Lindsey Graham's funeral and to eulogize him. And I said it was like watching a pro-life organization go eulogize Kermit Gosnell, the abortionist who was sent to prison. Lindsey Graham is aborting all the right people, as he said. The question is, was he? And was he doing it in a right way, in a moral way? I don't think he was. And I thought it was an abomination to see that. And I said, I think it's that kind of hypocrisy that is turning a lot of people off of going to church and thinking that the people there are somehow reflecting Christ. None of us reflects Christ perfectly. We've all got our flaws. I mean, we don't necessarily have to be a serial sexual offender, as some of the people are. We don't have to be a massive embezzler of funds. When you see something like that happening in a church, it is fatal to that church. And it should be. If the leadership is that kind of corrupt, you need to go somewhere else, do something else, even if you have your own home church or something like that. And that was something that I thought was a very beneficial thing. Just like you had Caitlin Johnston saying, we have to find ways to be more human. And I think all too often, when we have the big formal worship service, you have people sitting there as spectators. And if you're just going to be a spectator and you don't have any opportunity really to interact with other people, get to know what's happening in their lives, then it's really no different than just watching a sermon online. And now you're just one step away from getting into this AI data world that where everybody is separated from everybody else. I think that is the real issue. But Steve Watson had a very different take on it. He said this survey that showed that young Americans are abandoning church because they don't like the politics that are there. He said, well, I think that this shows that TDS is anti-Christian. TDS meaning Trump derangement syndrome. Well, there's another kind of TDS, and that is the Trump delusion syndrome. And I think we have seen over and over again the people who are rabidly partisan, who are rabidly supporting Trump, they're operating under delusion that they're not involved in idolatry. Even when they make gold statues to the guy and say prayers over it, talk about how he is God's gift to America, that type of idolatry should be off-putting to everybody. And I think that's what a lot of people are seeing. Maybe they're disgusted by these Christian leaders who support these efforts to cover up Epstein pedophiles, remain silent over these efforts. Maybe they're disgusted when they look at the genocide and they see these people talking about how they are pro-life. It's that kind of hypocrisy that we need to take on, and we need to purge that out of the church. At the same time, when I go to church, I don't wear my politics on my sleeve, and I don't talk to people about Trump because most of the time they would basically get very upset. So I basically, if I talk about politics at all, I'll talk about the issues, and I'll just say, and by their fruit, you will know them. And you should understand that when you look at Trump.
Yeah. We don't please anybody with our politics. No. If they're on the right, they're going to be upset with you. If they're on the left, they're going to be upset with you. There's no winning. It's right. A lose-lose situation. You're in a real Kobayashi Maru.
That's right. Yeah,
anytime someone asks me, so what are your politics? Like, ooh, you're not ready for this.
How much time do we have? I just tell people, watch my program sometime. But usually when I do that, somebody just casually met, I never hear back from them, even if I see them again. So I imagine I've offended them if they just tune into the program for a short period of time. Audi, Modern Retro Radio, he says, has anyone else noticed that Republican politicians no longer tout how free we are in America? That's right. I've said, that used to be something that we used to hear all the time casually from everybody, not just Republican politicians. It used to be, well, hey, it's a free country, right? Do you ever hear anybody say that? I don't ever hear anybody say that. I also don't ever hear anybody say, well, hey, don't make a federal case out of it. Because everybody on both the left and the right want to make a federal case out of everything. They want all power and all decisions to be consolidated in Washington. That is a stupid, dangerous idea. Nearly half of young adults do not attend church, they said, due to Christian support for President Trump. Well, again, we've had situations where this church we went to and the lady showed up and she had actually had a what do you call it? I don't know. It was a picture of Trump that she put on the window, right? It's like an applique or a decal or something. And Trump looked like he was sitting in the back seat waving to people. And I commented to Karen, I said, we better not ever talk about politics to that lady over there. Just keep it on some other subjects. But anyway, when we look at this, it is a very different thing if the leader of the church turns into a cheerleader for Trump. And so I don't say that people at the pulpit should not talk about politics. I think they very much should. I think they'll talk about how that impacts our Christian beliefs and what our worldview would have us do about things. But they know as well as you do that if they talk about that, they're going to see their congregation shrink down to next to nothing. So if they talk about it, they will talk about Israel, about fake Israel, or they will talk about Trump, and they have found that is safe. And I think it's that type of thing that is driving people away. But when you look at this article from Steve Watson, he thinks that it's actually and he's right, the institutions are driving people away. So the universities and things like that, they are turning people into secular atheists. They're not turning them, however, into necessarily Trump haters. They are turning them into leftist politics, and that is all he sees. But it is also the fact that they're turning them into secular atheists, and that's why you're seeing the pushback not going to the churches that are there. And so, I guess the question is, when I look at this, and he talks about how they've been radicalized by the colleges that they go to and so forth and so on, and all of that is true. But I guess the question is, if they would only support Trump, would it make us a great country? Well, no, I think it would kind of make us like Alan Dershowitz, who, by the way, when he jumps into all of this issue about fake Israel, which he's a big supporter of, and Alan Dershowitz is a big supporter of Trump because Trump supports fake Israel. But he says, I can't really embrace the Republican Party because Alan Dershowitz embraces LGBT. He defends pedophiles in court and all the rest of this stuff. He's talked about how he wants the age of consent lowered to young teens for his own personal benefit. But he says the problem is American Jews.
I have to tell you that the real problem are Jews. Jews in the Upper West Side, Jews in the Upper East Side, Jews in Park Slope, the Jews who voted for Mamdani. Remember, 7,000 Jews voted for Adolf Hitler in 1932. Most of them ended up in the gas chambers. And these idiot Jews, they have no idea what they're doing. And, people say Jews are smart. Yeah, they're smart Jews. Some of the dumbest people I've ever met are Jews from Park Slope and Upper East Side and Upper West Side who don't understand.
He doesn't agree with their politics, so they're dumb.
Im anili mili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am for myself alone, what am I? That's Hillel. You don't need Hillel to understand that any Jew who votes for Mamdani is a self-hater. You can't do that. You can't vote for somebody who marginalizes Jews, discriminates against Jews, hates Israel, calls Israel a genocidal state falsely.
That's what got him elected.
Jews who do that.
That's why Jews voted for him, because they don't support fake Israel either. They're not Zionists. And so when you look at what they put out, he says, this is Watson again. He says, this is a pipeline. Universities that once transmitted Western civilization values now transmit a secular political religion. Whose religion is that exactly? Well, this secularized political religion that has weaponized race, that has weaponized sex, that has pushed LGBT and transgenderism, where is that coming from? Well, that's coming from liberal Jews like Alan Dershowitz. The wars that are there, that's done by the conservative Jews in Israel, the people who are proud of the fact that they say, hey, we're killers. As a matter of fact, this particular clip here was just caught by a BBC reporter talking to one of the settlers that was there in Jerusalem, running people out at gunpoint, threatening to kill them so they could steal their land.
It sounds like you're saying one Jewish life is worth hundreds or thousands of Palestinian lives.
Not million. One Jewish life, it's 10 million, okay?
That just sounds racist.
Yes.
Because it is.
I know, but this is the truth. Because God chose us. Because of this, you are jealous.
Yeah, it is a fake Israel. It is a fake theology. It is the most racist government that you can have anywhere. And there's a lot of American Jews who said specifically that they voted for Mamdani because they didn't like what Israel was doing in Gaza. I played those clips for you when that happened. They said they had people who came from Israel, reporters there, and they were asking them who they voted for and what they thought about Mamdani. And they said they were outraged when we told them that we were voting for Mamdani. They couldn't believe it, but we don't support what Israel is doing, what the Zionists are doing. And So getting back to the story, you have Watson saying America's churches recognize that the real barrier to young attendance is not the gospel, but the prior capture of the universities by hostile, godless ideology. And we need to name that ideology and what it is. Secular humanism, which is typically pushed by secular Jewish intellectuals. Historically, that's been the case. But I got to say that the gospel, even though that is good news, it is not received that way by many because of exclusiveness. You know, the true message of Christ, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. That is an offense. That is a stumbling block to most people. It is a free offer of eternal life. But many people are not willing to accept that because they want to have this. That's your original diversity, I guess. That is right there. They find that so offensive, they won't even take a second look at it. Well, we're going to take a quick break, folks, and we're going to be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. And I've got a comment here from Dougda007. My husband works with some younger Gen Z kids. Whenever he shares interesting facts with them, they always ask, how do you know that? They literally have no curiosity or desire to learn. They don't even want to do simple internet search to look things up. You know, that is an interesting thing. I've thought about, how did I get into this, what I do here? And I guess it really always goes back to a curiosity. I'm really curious about things. And then when I find out what's going on, it gets me really angry. And that's what compels me to speak, because I'm not somebody who ever was comfortable doing public speaking. But when I ran for Congress, I got angry enough to get into some televised debates. But that's really when you look at what's that about, and when you find out, it gets you angry. But right now, I'm very grateful, and I want to thank the people who helped us in July. And we got a very, very slow start to the month, but we got caught up at the end. And I want to thank especially Tom, Nancy, Abby, and Sammy, their family. They were a huge help with all this. But I also want to thank other people who've contributed on Zelle. Let me just read out their first names and last initial real quickly. Lawrence C., Joseph R., Janice W., Casey R., Kimberly M., Brian, let's see, it's just a P or an R here. That is a P. Justin C., Kyle H., Travis S., Jeffrey B., and we have one person who put in the message said, this is from Vince Hill. Use the name. So thank you, Vince Hill. I appreciate that. And also people sent checks. We have Lois Libby, and we have Gary B., Peter G., Carol F., Jack and Veronica Y., Ronald C., Dale L., and on Cash App we have Nathaniel, this is Nathaniel C., Lambert W., and Robert A. Thank you so much, all of you. Those are our supporters who make this program possible. Before we end the program, I want to talk real quickly about what is happening with the economy. We had Reason took issue with Trump's tariffs because he's just now come up with a third prevarication to say that he can unilaterally apply these tariffs and change them at will. And going back to the aluminum tariffs, Trump first did those in his first administration. And Reason said Trump said tariffs on aluminum would boost domestic production. But now even his own White House admits that that did not happen. It's been more than 8 years since his first aluminum tariffs were imposed. How long do we have to wait before we call this a failure? And again, when we look at what Trump is doing in his second terms, the tariffs have become personal weapons. In the past, and I think it was a mistake, we had governments who used them to protect individual industries, which is what he said he was doing with aluminum. We've also had situations where when the government was small enough, under Thomas Jefferson, he said we can fund the entire government with tariffs at the border, and so no person in America knows the tax man personally. We don't have a tax man from Washington. No farmer, no laborer, no mechanic knows a tax man. He said that at the inauguration of his second term, that he had eliminated all internal taxes because they could collect enough money to run the small government at the borders. But we have to make the government much smaller if we're going to do something like that. The executive order that Trump signed back in 2018 declared that aluminum was being imported into such quantities and under such circumstances that it threatened to impair national security. National security, the canard that they always resort to, right, for all kinds of infringements on the Constitution, and this is an infringement on the Constitution. In this particular case, usually national security is the canard in the coal mine when they want to do something that is deep, dark, and secret, and they don't want you to see what they're doing. In this particular case, he's using these phony claims of national security, claiming that he can issue an emergency order to support national security, and he can put tariffs out there however he wishes. So a lot has happened since then. We've seen aluminum prices have increased by a lot. Everything that's made with aluminum, whether you're talking about beer cans or cars, have gotten a lot more expensive as a result. Trump has raised and changed the minimum tariff several times. The baseline tariff has gone from 10% to 25%. Now there is an additional 50% tariffs on products that are made largely from aluminum. But one thing has not happened. America has not produced more aluminum. You don't have to trust economic reports, just ask the Trump administration. They say the domestic production and supply of primary aluminum, critical to the U.S. economy and defense industrial base, is still in insufficient supply, said Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Trump's solution, of course, is even more tariffs. Like I've said so many times, he is a New York City Democrat, and as Democrats typically do, they tell you that they're going to tax their way to prosperity. They also tell you that somebody else is going to pay the tax. And that is exactly what Trump does with these tariffs. We should not fall for this. And we should demand that he follow the Constitution. But of course, the MO that he does is, again, making these false claims that I have a special case, which he doesn't have. He does these things, they go into court, and it takes a while for them to adjudicate these things. And meanwhile, he's collecting the tariffs, just as he did with his special tariffs. And when that went to court, they told the court, they said, let us continue collecting these things, and if we don't collect all of it, we'll hand it back. Well, they didn't when they lost. And so they kept collecting it as they were litigating it. And when they lost in court, they're now fighting the hand back, except that in some cases, they are starting to hand the money back into some of these other cases. Now, this last national security rationale that he's come up with is being put against Canada. About 70% of America's imported aluminum comes from Canada, a neighbor and a close ally with which the U.S. has had a trade agreement until Trump tore it up, until he tore up our relationship with them as well. And so now he's claiming that this is a national security issue. How could that be a national? What circumstances would mean that we are not able to get aluminum from Canada? Yet he is dropping heavy tariffs on them because not of any economic issue, but because of egonomics, the fact that he is using this as a personal weapon against different organizations. And yet, when we look at what the Trump tariffs have cost us, we have a tax organization that's gone through and calculated this, about $1,000 in 2025 and about $900 this year. So about $1,900 for the last 2 years. Now, Thomas Massey retweeted a post that someone had put up, and it said the Trump administration created over $100 billion worth of profit for corporations. Because what happened was that they collected these taxes as they're starting to refund them. Walmart gets $10 billion back. Target gets $2 billion. Costco, $2 billion. Nike, $1 billion. Home Depot, $2 billion. And the person who put this out, of course, it was retweeted by Thomas Massey, said, "Where is your $2,000 check?" See, they will refund the money to these large organizations that have the money to fight the Trump administration to get their checks back. Apple gets $2.2 billion, but you don't get your $2,000 that it cost your household back. That's the way this is rolling out. It is a massive wealth redistribution. And we just had Trump yesterday, actually it's over the weekend, they announced that they were going to be bailing out yet another foreign country. We saw this happen with Argentina, and it was a betrayal and abandonment of the farmers in America. Argentina, ungrateful for the bailout, immediately took up the slack over the tariffs and said, we'll sell soy to China, and they did. They took away the business. Now we've got, in Japan, their fiat currency situation is blowing up on them. And so the Trump administration, Trump has decided that he is going to support the Japanese yen with the American dollar, and the American dollar went down. Here's what Trump had to say about that.
Japan wanted to, it was really more than anything else, it was a signal of friendship.
You said that the
anti-weapon and the dollar is doing great.
You said
the fact is, our country is doing great. Everybody wants help from our country.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the fact is that our country is doing great and the dollar is going up. Well, no, it isn't. It's actually exactly the opposite of what Trump is saying. The U.S. dollar tumbled sharply against the yen following a confirmed joint intervention by the U.S. and Japan to support the Japanese currency. The intervention pushed the dollar down from a recent peak of roughly 163 yen to the mid 150 yen range. The currency saw an immediate sharp correction. The dollar's long-term trajectory depends on fundamental factors, but like interest rate differentials and things like that, and debt, of course. But when you look at what Trump is doing, as one person put up on a meme, this is Trump versus Reagan, where Reagan in this cartoon says, "I destroyed the Soviet Union." Trump said, "I destroyed the United States." Because we go back and we look at these tariff increases, and the same people who calculated this said, this is the biggest tax increase we've had since 1993. We go back and we look at the tax increases that happened under Bill Clinton, the tax increases that happened under George Bush. Remember, he was talking about voodoo economics, and he said, don't worry, I'm not going to raise your taxes, and then he did. He said, read my lips, no new taxes. And then when he raised them, he sarcastically said to the journalist as he jogged off, read my hips. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us. The common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.